All right, so let's get into it. When India's 2026-27 budget first dropped, a lot of people thought, well, that it was kind of a non-event. It was short, no flashy announcements, and for most people, life just went on. But, and this is the key, beneath that really quiet surface is a budget that might just be one of the most strategic we've seen in years.
And this quote pretty much sums up the initial reaction from a lot of experts. For you, for me, for the average person, nothing really changed. The price of shampoo, your daily costs, your income tax, all of it just stayed the same. It was a budget that was really defined by what it didn't do more than what it did. So that's the big question, right? If this isn't about giving you immediate relief or some huge big bang reform, then what on earth is the government actually trying to do? Well, that's exactly what we're about to unpack.
Okay, so first, let's look at why so many people called this a holding budget or just, business as usual.
Look, the government made a really clear choice here. Instead of shaking everything up, the main goal was stability. Your personal tax rates? Untouched. No new big schemes that would change your monthly budget overnight. The message was loud and clear. We're staying the course.
And this quote it nails it. This whole thing was not about these little consumer tweaks. The government's eyes were set on a much, much bigger prize.
And this, right here, is where things get really fascinating. Because hiding under that calm, business-as-usual surface, the budget was placing a series of massive, high-stakes bets on the industries that could literally define India's future.
So, bet number one, a huge, monumental push to make India the world's next great hub for data centers. We're talking about the physical backbone of the entire cloud and AI revolution.
Now, how do you get the world's biggest tech companies to pack up and set up shop in your country? Well, you give them an incentive that is so big, so long-term, it's almost unheard of. You give them a tax holiday all the way to 2047.
Yeah, this is a total game changer. A 100% tax exemption for over 2 decades for global giants that are providing cloud services from India. It's no wonder analysts called it the budget's biggest positive surprise. This is designed to pull in billions in investment from the likes of Google and Microsoft.
Okay, so the next big bet is just as ambitious. It's about moving beyond just putting electronics together and actually getting into manufacturing the most critical component there is, semiconductors, the brains of every device.
And to prove they're serious, the government is nearly doubling the money for its semiconductor mission to 40,000 crore rupees. This isn't just a signal, it's a massive injection of cash meant to build the factories, the so-called fabs, and the whole ecosystem you need for a futuristic electronics industry.
This right here shows you the huge strategic shift. The old way of thinking was, hey, let's get companies to assemble their phones in India. The new model is, let's build the entire value chain right here, from designing the chips to actually manufacturing them. It's a massive, massive leap in ambition.
And it doesn't even stop there. The budget is also carving out support for other critical areas. There's a big push in biopharma to move beyond just making generic drugs. There's a strategic focus on mining rare earth minerals to cut our dependence on China, and there are new incentives for aviation manufacturing too. So you're probably wondering, how can the government possibly afford to make all these huge long-term bets? Well, the answer is in a very disciplined, and some might even say conservative economic strategy.
It all comes down to this one concept: fiscal prudence. To put it simply, it just means the government is acting like a responsible household. It's keeping its own debt and spending in check, and by doing that, it creates a stable, predictable environment for everybody else to invest in.
And you can see that commitment right here in the numbers. By continuing to shrink the fiscal deficit, that's basically the gap between what the government earns and what it spends, it sends this powerful signal of stability to investors all over the world.
This quote from an expert just sums it all up perfectly. By keeping its own finances tidy, the government is basically trying to give the private sector the confidence to crowd in and make the big investments we need for growth, because they know the economy is on solid ground.
But of course, a grand strategy like this one isn't going to be without its questions and its critics. So to really get the full picture, we have to look at some of the key debates that popped up from the fine print.
Okay, so the biggest point of skepticism is always around capital expenditure, or CAPEX. That's the money the government spends on things like roads, ports, and bridges. Critics love to argue that the government budgets these huge amounts for infrastructure, but then consistently fails to spend it all. So is that actually true?
Well, the data tells a bit of a different story.
For the previous year, the actual spending was only about 2% below the target. So what this tells us is that, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's a far cry from the massive underspending that some critics suggest. The government is getting a lot better at actually executing these big infrastructure plans. The other major flashpoint is how states get their funding. Now, the overall slice of central taxes that goes to the states is still at 41%, but there are some serious tensions brewing. Southern states, especially, are arguing they get shortchanged. They contribute way more in taxes than they ever get back, and a reported 15% drop in certain grants has only added more fuel to that fire.
And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. And honestly, it might be the most revealing part of this whole long-term strategy. It's a detail so big, it's amazing it wasn't a headline, and it was buried deep inside the budget documents.
Tucked away in all that fine print was a huge increase in defense spending, especially for buying new equipment and for modernization. The capital part of the defense budget is up a staggering 22%. Now, this isn't for salaries or pensions, this is for hardware. A jump like this signals that major purchases, like the next batch of Rafale fighter jets and new made-in-India submarines, are probably coming very soon, which ties right back into that whole push for domestic manufacturing.
So we're left with this question. This budget is really two things at once. It's a quiet, steady hand for today, but it's also a series of huge, risky, but maybe transformative bets on tomorrow. Whether this unique strategy, playing it safe and gambling big at the same time, is the right one to power India's long-term ambitions, well, I guess...